Oliver and his brake van Toad liked working in the big yards, but one morning Toad noticed that Oliver was unhappy. He decided to find out why.
Excuse me, Mr. Oliver. It seems to me that things are not well with you, if you forgive me for mentioning it.
You're quite right, Toad, replied Oliver. All I do is shunt these trucks onto the turntable. I long for a nice run. It's what an engine really needs.
Quite so, Mr. Oliver. May I suggest that you speak to the Fat Controller about your problems?
Oliver just grew unhappier, and he was rough with the trucks.
You're no good, Oliver. You're dangerous. We want Percy.
Pah! Percy's far too busy to be bothering with the likes of you, and he bumped the trucks hard. You silly engine, shouted a workman. It'll take a long time to repair this turntable, which will cause confusion and delay. That night, the Fat Controller came to see Oliver in his shed.
Oliver, you have caused confusion. I thought you could control trucks.
You shall work the mail train for a while. Maybe the night air will clear your smoke box. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir, said Oliver sadly. Cheer up, old chap, said his driver. The mail train run is a grand run for a fine engine like you. Oliver smiled, but he still felt he'd let everyone down. His driver took them along the coastal run with the mail train. The sea was calm, and the fresh air couldn't help but brighten Oliver's spirits. They made good speed until it was time to collect some important mail from Harold the helicopter. Come on, Harold! They waited and waited. At last, Harold landed.
Sorry I'm late, Great Western. Had a bit of a problem with one of my arms. Kept letting me down when I was meant to be up. You know how it is.
We know that we'll be late for our first run, said Oliver's driver. Soon they were on their way again. Ahead was a red signal light. Oliver didn't realize that the signalman had dozed off waiting for them. Oliver whistled several times, but the signal stayed red. There must be something wrong with that signal. We'll go slowly and stop by the signal box, said his driver. But they never reached it. The points before the signal box were switched onto an old track. They were going the wrong way. Oliver's fireman was concerned. We need to find a water tower soon. Instead, they saw an old, rundown station. They stopped just beyond the platform, where the driver and fireman stepped out from Oliver's cab and examined the old building. As they did so, Oliver's eyes became fixed on an old wooden shed that sat on the line just ahead of him. He felt nervous as he eyed the spooky structure closely.
What's wrong, old boy? His fireman asked.
It's nothing. I just think we should go, Oliver answered anxiously.
Very well, then, the fireman replied. We'll head back and explain to the Fat Controller what's happened.
But just as he got back into the cab, they all heard a strange wheezing sound.
What was that?
Oliver quivered.
Goodness me!
Look at that! Cried the driver. Steam was trickling out from the cracks under the shed doors.
I think we've just found another steam engine, exclaimed the fireman.
Wait! Oliver quickly put in. Are we sure it's safe to go in there? Don't be silly, Oliver. I'm sure that whatever's in there won't hurt you. Here, we'll go and investigate. The driver and fireman flung open the shed doors, but to their surprise, there was nothing there. The only thing inside was an old steam engine funnel, which sat in between the rusty rails. The driver picked it up. See, Oliver? That wasn't so bad. The fireman ran over and was shocked to see a burn mark cutting deep into the driver's hand. The guard finally stepped out from his van. What's going on here? He demanded. His answer came in the sight of the shed doors rapidly opening and closing by themselves. The crew leapt back in surprise. I think we've outstayed our welcome, Oliver cried in fear. Quite right, shouted the guard, who made a mad dash back to his van. The driver and fireman got back in the cab and quickly drove Oliver away. Meanwhile, the Fat Controller was very worried. Oliver has not returned. We'd best send out a search party. They were flying over the old sections of track when... There they are, boomed the Fat Controller. Harold touched down safely next to Oliver and his crew, who were sitting at the junction. Well, Great Western, so you wanted to go on a little advent... He quickly cut himself off when he noticed how scared Oliver looked. Are you all right, my dear? You look as if you've seen a ghost. It was a bit of an accident, replied the driver. We're sorry, sir. I should hope so, said the Fat Controller. Oliver, I know this wasn't your fault, and that sleeping signalman shall be dealt with. But now, let's focus on getting you all back to the yards. Oliver did arrive back sometime that morning. Toad is very eager to know about Oliver's adventures. Excuse me for asking, Mr. Oliver, but how was your nice run last night? Well, it was quite eventful. Got sent down the wrong line and ended up in an old station, and, that was it. Well, it seems like you had an interesting time then, Mr. Oliver. Toad chuckled. Maybe you should ask the Fat Controller to give you more jobs like these. Oliver wasn't so sure what Toad meant, but deep inside, he hoped he'd never have to, ever again.